"Sir, your ticket has been canceled." The gate agent's words landed on me like a splash of ice water. "What do you mean canceled? My son booked this Alaska trip for my 60th birthday." She angled the screen in my direction and dropped her voice low. "The cabin is registered under someone else's name." I stared out through the terminal window and felt my stomach fall away. My son was there laughing alongside his wife and father-in-law, already moving toward the boarding gate. I lifted my hand and called out his name, but he never once looked back. Then, just as the plane doors were drawing shut, my phone buzzed with a message that made me understand. Missing that flight may have rescued far more than my vacation. "Welcome to His Hidden Revenge. Glad you're here with me today. If this kind of story speaks to you, go ahead and tap subscribe so the next one finds its way to you, without you having to go looking for it. Before we go any further, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? There's something about knowing people are sitting with these stories from all different corners of the world. That means a great deal to me. A quick note. Some elements of this story have been shaped for audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters most here is the truth at the heart of it. They walked onto that plane, and I was left behind at gate B22 with a canceled ticket canceled by my own family. The gate agent, Paula Denton, maybe 40, with the practiced gentleness of someone who had delivered bad news, one too many times studied my boarding pass for the third time and slowly shook her head. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Chadwick, but this ticket has been canceled. Not delayed, not rescheduled, just erased." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice holding steady despite the cold fluorescent light making everything feel faintly unreal. My son handled the booking. She clicked through her screen again, fingers moving with professional efficiency. "The cabin is registered under a Mr. Hayden Fenley. Your name doesn't appear anywhere in the system. Through the security ropes about 50 feet away, I found them. Brett, my son, 35 years old, a corporate accountant carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never once missed a mortgage payment, stood there laughing with a latte in one hand. Beside him, Petra, his wife of 6 years, 30 years old, razor sharp with the household finances, wore that same bright smile she'd had at my kitchen table 3 weeks before. Behind them, Dalton and Miriam Fenley, Petra's parents, 62 and 58, respectively rolled matching silver suitcases toward the jet bridge. Dalton moved with the polished charm of a former Florida real estate broker, though I'd never pressed him on what former actually meant. Miriam, quiet, as always, let her husband manage the conversation with the boarding staff. And then there was Hayden. Petra's brother, 33, worked in sales and had that particular gift for making everything sound like an opportunity. Apparently, he'd found one in my cabin reservation. Not one of them looked back. I turned back to Paula. "Thank you for checking." She offered the sympathetic look reserved for travelers whose plans had just fallen apart. I folded the useless printout into my jacket pocket and stepped back from the counter. The smell of airport coffee drifted through the recycled terminal air. 3 weeks earlier, everything had felt entirely different. It was my 60th birthday, early November. One of those perfect New England autumn mornings where the sunlight poured through the kitchen windows of my Philadelphia duplex, warm and golden. I was sitting at the table with black coffee, the smell of fresh ground beans filling the room, when Brett appeared. That same grin I remembered from his boyhood. "Dad, we've been planning this for months," he said, sliding a printed itinerary across the table. "Alaska, the glaciers, the whales. You've always wanted to see the northern lights." Petra appeared behind him, resting one hand on his shoulder. Someone who managed the household finances with the cold precision of a person who viewed relationships as balance sheets. Though that morning, her smile seemed genuinely warm. "It's a family celebration, Rowan. All of us together for your 60th. I picked up the itinerary. 14 days, inside Passage Juneau, Skagway, Glacier Bay. The kind of trip Elise and I used to talk about before the cancer came. For the first time since my wife died 2 years ago, I felt something close to warmth. Dalton and Miriam are coming, too," Brett added. "And Hayden, full family reunion." "This is too much," I said, though. My throat had gone tight. "It's not too much, Dad. You spent 40 years building bridges for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. 60 years old, retired, and you've barely left Philadelphia. Let us do this." I looked at the total cost estimate at the bottom of the page. "I'll wire you my share. 4 cabins. What's that about?" "$4,000 each. $4,750 covers it," Brett said quickly. I've got the booking site open. Just need to lock down the cabins before the rates go up. I pulled out my phone and opened my bank app right there at the kitchen table, warm ceramic mug still in my other hand. The transfer took 90 seconds. Brett's phone buzzed with the confirmation, and he flashed that same easy smile. "You're going to love it, Dad." I had no way of knowing then that those $4,750 would be the very last time I ever placed blind, unquestioning faith in my own son. Back at Gate B-22, the boarding announcement echoed through Terminal B, final call for Flight 519 to Seattle. I watched through the cold glass as they moved toward the gate. Brett had his carry-on slung over one shoulder. He glanced back just once, and his eyes found mine across the terminal. I was still standing there beside the counter with Paula. He saw me. I know he saw me. Then he looked away quickly and picked up his pace. Petra handed her boarding pass to the agent without a backward glance. Dalton and Miriam followed Miriam quiet as ever, content to let Dalton handle all matters of business. Hayden, 33 family connections expert, scanned his pass and disappeared down the jet bridge into the aircraft that should have held my cabin. The family I'd wired nearly $5,000 to join on a celebration cruise. Nobody waved. The jet bridge door sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss. I stood there as the ground crew disconnected the walkway and the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Through the window, I could see passengers settling in, overhead bins snapping shut, flight attendants running their safety checks. Somewhere on that plane, Brett was sitting in a cabin I had paid for. This was no mix-up. This was deliberate. I didn't call after them, didn't shout or demand explanations. Something inside me closed off clean, cold, and clear as the terminal glass. At 60 years old, I had spent 4 decades as a civil engineer, building bridges across rivers and highways for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I knew precisely how to identify a structural failure. I turned away from Gate B-22, the canceled ticket printout crumpled in my jacket pocket, and walked back through the terminal toward ground transportation. My footsteps echoed on the polished floor, blending with the distant rumble of other passengers rolling bags and the endless loop of departure announcements. Before I reached the taxi stand, my phone buzzed. An automatic bank fraud alert triggered by the system. Someone had just attempted a purchase on my Visa card from the cruise ship's onboard gift shop. I hadn't authorized any purchase. Brett's name was still on that card as an authorized user. The ride home would give me time to begin cataloging every crack in the foundation. The rain came down harder as I stepped outside the terminal. By the time I got to the taxi stand, water had soaked through my jacket, but I barely registered it. All I could feel was the weight of 35 years collapsing into one terrible question. When did my son learn to lie straight to my face? The taxi pulled onto Y-95 South windshield wipers, thumping their steady rhythm against the November rain. Highway lights blurred past in streaks of yellow and white. The driver asked if I wanted heat. I told him no. I needed the cold. I sat in the back seat and started cataloging. That's what engineers do when a structure fails. We catalog. College tuition when he was 22 and the scholarship fell through. Down payment on the condo when he was 28 and the market was right. The car note when he was 31 and the old sedan finally gave out. Wedding costs when he married Petra 6 years ago. The full reception because her parents couldn't contribute. Every single time he needed rescuing, I was there. And every single time the distance between his crisis and my checkbook grew a little shorter. Somewhere around the Schuylkill River Bridge, I stopped thinking about the money and started thinking about Elise, not her warnings this time, but her example. She'd grown up poor in Allentown, worked 3 jobs, through community college, graduated with honors at 28 while I was still finding my footing. She became an accountant who could read a person's character from the way they sorted their receipts. She never spoke of those hard years as sacrifice. She called them investment. I had married a woman who built herself from nothing, and somehow raised a son who expected everything handed to him. That failure wasn't Brett's alone. It was mine too. The taxi pulled up to the duplex at 11:40. I paid cash overpaid by reflex and climbed out into the drizzle. The house sat divided down the middle, my side on the left, Brett's on the right. His windows were dark, of course they were. He was somewhere over the Pacific Northwest by now, drinking champagne in the cabin I'd funded. I lowered myself onto the front steps. The rain soaked through to my skin. I didn't move. I needed to sit there and let the sharpness of the pain burn itself out, the way you let a blister drain before you bandage it. Around me, the neighborhood was silent, wet pavement, distant traffic on the main road. the rhythmic drip from the gutter downspout Brett had promised to fix last spring. Did I fail him, Elise? I said aloud to no one. Did I give him so much that he forgot how to stand on his own? But she wasn't there to answer. She hadn't been there for 2 years. How many bridges had I built for my son, only to watch him cross them? Without ever once glancing down at the foundation I'd poured, I sat there for 10 minutes, maybe 15. Long enough for the cold to work its way into my bones. Long enough for a neighbor's car to pull into the driveway across the street, the driver glancing over with a flicker of concern, before thinking better of getting involved. Long enough for the rain to quit and the sky to settle into that flat, colorless gray that November does better than any other month. Then I got up, unlocked the door, and went inside. I didn't eat. I changed into dry clothes, brewed coffee I never touched, and sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing until darkness filled the windows. At 11 o'clock, I opened my laptop. The overhead kitchen light was harsh and yellow, throwing hard shadows across the table. I pulled up my credit card account, the one where Brett was still listed as an authorized user, a convenience I'd set up years back for genuine emergencies. The screen loaded, I scrolled. August 3, $200. A car insurance payment filed under Brett's name. I hadn't authorized that. September, $12,400. Tuition to a graduate program I hadn't known he'd enrolled in. October, $8,750. Home renovations, granite countertops, according to the merchant code. November, $6,500, deposited to an account under Petra's name. $31,000 across 4 months. I pushed back in the chair, both hands flat on the table. This was no impulsive slip. This was a system, a deliberate pattern, a framework of exploitation assembled carefully, month by month, charge by charge. While I nodded along, signed the birthday cards, and wired the cruise deposit like the reliable fool they'd spent years training me to be. I created a new folder on my desktop and typed the name slowly, deliberately, each keystroke a small act of reclaiming something. Evidence log. November 14th, 2023, day 1. Then I started copying transaction records. Every charge, every date, every merchant name. I worked the way I used to draft bridge specifications for the Commonwealth methodical. No emotion, no commentary, just data. 40 years as a civil engineer had taught me that before you repair a structural failure, you document it first. By midnight, I had 18 pages. By 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd cross-referenced them against my bank statements and turned up another $7,000 in indirect withdrawals I couldn't explain. The house held no sound except the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional click of the keys. On the other side of the duplex wall, Brett's half sat dark and empty. I pictured him in his cruise cabin at that very moment, laughing, drinking, celebrating the 60th birthday gift, alongside the family who'd helped him steal it. The blueprint of their scheme ran far deeper than one canceled ticket. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was heartbroken but because the full architecture of their betrayal was finally becoming visible, line by line, transaction by transaction. And I had spent 40 years learning exactly how to read a set of structural plans. I woke before the alarm at 5:30, though I'd barely closed my eyes. They opened and the calculations were already running. By 6 o'clock, I had spread 30 years of financial history across my office floor in neat chronological rows, an engineer's autopsy of his own generosity. Pale gray November light seeped through the windows as I worked bank statements, property records, insurance declarations, utility bills, tax returns. Every document that charted the architecture of my relationship with my son, laid out oldest to newest, left to right, the way bridge blueprints move from foundation to superstructure. I started with the duplex. 5 years ago, when Petra needed a place after the wedding, I'd offered them the second unit at a family rate. I'd set it at $800 a month. It had felt generous, but sensible. I pulled up current rental data on my laptop. Comparable 2-bedroom units in the neighborhood, $2,400 a month. The subsidy came to $1,600 per month times 60 months, $96,000. I wrote the figure on a legal pad in my careful engineer's print. Then I moved to the next column, property insurance. I'd been carrying both units under a single policy. Brett's share ran roughly $1,800 a year, times 5 years, $9,000. Utilities when his payments ran late, and they ran late often, I'd covered the gap to keep the lights on. Another $6,000 over the years. The credit card abuse I'd already logged the night before. I opened my primary savings account, the one where Brett held read-only access for emergencies. He'd never pulled anything directly. He didn't have to. He could see precisely how much cushion sat there, exactly how far he could push, before I'd be in real trouble. $149,000 over 5 years. Who exactly had I been building this bridge for? I settled back in the office chair, papers fanned around me like evidence at a crime scene. The coffee I'd made at 5:30 had gone stone cold. I didn't touch it. I just held my eyes on the number on the legal pad and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not even grief, just clarity. This wasn't a son who'd stumbled into bad habits. This was a system deliberately maintained across half a decade while I signed the checks and asked nothing. I didn't panic. I simply nodded, the way an engineer marks a critical design flaw before anyone gets hurt. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in Gwendolyn Ashford's office in downtown Philadelphia. Gwendolyn, 58, had practiced estate law for 30 years and had developed an instinct for predatory patterns the moment a client came through her door. She'd handled Elise's estate planning 8 years earlier, and I'd trusted her judgment then. I trusted it now. Her office had dark oak-paneled walls lined with heavy legal volumes, the kind of room that felt as though it had absorbed 1,000 hard conversations. She sat across from me at a mahogany desk, reading glasses balanced on her nose, working through the folder I'd brought. I'd organized everything: chronological documentation of the subsidies, printouts of the unauthorized charges, the Alaska cruise cancellation screenshots showing Brett's account access. She read in silence for 10 minutes, occasionally marking notes. The only sounds were the scratch of her pen and the muffled traffic rising from the street below. Then she looked up. "Rowan," she said, her voice carrying the steadiness of someone who'd said difficult things many times. "The one stroke of luck here is that you came to me before signing anything they might put in front of you. I haven't signed anything I said. Good. Because this level of financial dependency combined with access to your accounts suggests they may be positioning for a larger move." She tapped the folder. "Power of attorney conservatorship, any legal instrument that hands them control if you were ever deemed incapacitated." The words hung there. "They'd need to establish incompetence," I said. "Proof is surprisingly easy to construct when the target is isolated and the family presents a unified account." She paused. "How old are you? 60? Living alone?" "Yes." She nodded as though that confirmed what she'd already suspected. "We need to build you a legal fortress, and quickly." For the first time since the airport terminal, I felt my face ease into something close to a smile. What kind of fortress under Pennsylvania? General laws we can establish an irrevocable trust. Once your assets, specifically the duplex, pass into this trust, they leave your personal estate permanently. They become entirely unreachable by outside claims, including from heirs. I recognized the language immediately. It was the legal equivalent of a load-bearing wall, something you cannot remove without bringing the whole structure down. How permanent, I asked. Irrevocable means irrevocable. Once executed, you cannot undo it. Neither can your son. Neither can a court-absent fraud. And if we establish your mental competency on record now, that avenue closes too. How long? 2 weeks if we move quickly. She reached for a fresh legal pad. I'll begin drafting today. You'll need a competency evaluation from a physician, and you'll need to name a beneficiary for the trust, someone who receives the benefit if you die. It can't be you, and it can't be someone you could be pressured into changing. A charity is the cleanest option. I thought of Elise. She had always wanted to fund scholarships for children who needed a second chance. "A scholarship fund," I said, "in my wife's name." Gwendolyn wrote it down. "Perfect. That gives us both mission clarity and legal insulation." The afternoon light came in at a low slant through her office windows. Outside, Philadelphia moved through its ordinary Thursday people, heading home, the traffic thickening on Walnut Street. The world carrying on as though mine hadn't just found its footing again. I drove home through the evening traffic in total silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's load. I was drafting my own foundation. I knew precisely what structure needed to be built. I came home that evening with a plan. Gwendolyn would draft the trust. I would document everything. The architecture was straightforward. Protect what remained, cut off what was exposed, wait for them to overreach. On the third night after the airport, my phone lit up the dark living room while I sat reading trust clauses in the armchair. A single notification, and it proved they were already toasting my erasure. It was 11:47 p.m. I'd been sitting under a single floor lamp, working through the Pennsylvania statutes Gwendolyn had printed for me. The phone screen flared on the side table, bright against the darkness. Family group chat. I picked it up. Petra had posted a photo. A luxury balcony overlooking Hubbard Glacier. Blue-white ice stretching to the horizon under pale northern light. In the foreground, a champagne glass caught the sun, golden perfectly framed. The caption read, "Finally some peace and quiet." Below it, Hayden had added a clinking glasses emoji. Brett's name appeared in the thread participants, but he'd written nothing. I sat there for 10 seconds, maybe 15, looking at that champagne glass. They were buying their peace and quiet with my stolen retirement. That was perfectly fine. I was engineering a quietness of my own. I took a screenshot. Then I opened the evidence log on my laptop and created a new time-stamped entry. November 16th, 11:47 p.m. Petra texts family chat. Finally some peace and quiet. Screen capture saved. Every piece of digital arrogance they broadcast became another entry in my log. They were constructing my case for me one champagne glass at a time. I went to bed at midnight and slept better than I had in 3 days. The following morning, Wednesday, I woke with a task list. I needed old insurance files to cross-reference against the property records Gwendolyn required for the trust transfer. I remembered seeing them in the shared utility room, between the duplex units, a cramped space with dusty shelves, where Brett and I kept things too useful to discard, but too rarely needed to keep close. I unlocked the door at 9 o'clock. The room smelled of dust and old paper. Shelves ran along both walls, stacked with banker's boxes labeled in my careful print tax returns, 2008 to 2013 utility records. In the corner sat the old laser printer we'd set up years ago when Brett needed something for occasional home printing, but didn't want to buy his own. The printer's red error light was blinking. I almost walked past it, but engineers don't ignore error lights. I opened the paper tray. A single sheet sat crumpled in the feed mechanism, jammed at an angle. I worked it free and smoothed the creases flat against my palm. The header read, Asset Transition Plan, Draft Version 3, page 7 of 11. I stopped cold, page 7 of 11. My eyes dropped to the output tray below. 10 sheets of paper rested there, face down, uncollected. Brett had used the shared printer probably to keep the document off his corporate laptop, away from cloud backups and IT logs. He'd sent it to print, walked away expecting the pages to be waiting, and when one jammed, he never came back to check. I lifted the stack from the tray and carried it to the small desk by the window. Set the pages down in order, turned on the desk lamp. Page 1, cover sheet. Asset Transition Plan, Rowan Chadwick Estate, dated October 22nd, 2023, 3 weeks before my birthday, 3 weeks before the Alaska cruise pitch. Page 2, financial summary. My primary savings account balance, my retirement fund totals, the duplex assessed value $480,000. My name appeared 17 times on that page alone. Page 3, durable power of attorney draft. A blank signature line at the bottom, my name type beneath it, Rowan Chadwick Principal. Page 4, deed transfer form for the duplex. Grantor Rowan Chadwick. Grantees Brett Chadwick and Petra Chadwick, joint tenants. I kept reading. Pages 5 and 6 laid out a timeline. Phase 1, secure financial access, complete. Phase 2, establish care need documentation, November to December. Phase 3, execute legal transfers, January. Phase 4, transition to managed care, February. My hands were shaking by the time I got to page 7, the one that had jammed. It was a photocopied facility brochure. Stillwater Ridge Memory, Care, Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. Scenic Grounds, 24-hour nursing staff. Specialized dementia support. Page 8. Cost breakdown, monthly rate $6,800. Funding source subjects retirement distributions, plus property liquidation. Page 9. Transportation logistics, commercial flight, Philadelphia to Milwaukee. Private transport to the facility. Recommended minimal personal effects to ease transition. Page 10. Contact restrictions. Suggest limited visiting hours during the acclimation period first 90 days. Monitor all communication for signs of confusion or agitation. Page 11. The application. Prospective resident Rowan Chadwick. Date of birth November 14th, 1963. Current address, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Medical history to be documented. Cognitive assessment pending. Emergency contact, Brett Chadwick's son. Financial responsibility, Brett Chadwick. Power of attorney pending. My name, my birth date, 200 miles from home. I sat there beneath the desk lamp in that dusty utility room, holding 11 pages that mapped out precisely how my son intended to erase me from my own life. Stillwater Ridge, Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. 1,200 miles from Philadelphia. From Elise's grave, from every structure I'd spent 60 years building. My son didn't just want my money. He wanted me gone, warehoused in a memory care facility, where no one would question why a perfectly competent 60-year-old man never had visitors, never came home, never thought to ask why his entire estate had migrated into his son's accounts. But they had made one critical engineering error. They'd left the blueprints where I could find them. I carried all 11 pages home and locked them in a filing cabinet. Then I waited. On the 5th night, I was sitting with those pages spread across my bed when my phone vibrated at 100 in the morning, Brett's caller ID glowing in the pitch darkness. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Hey, Dad?" His voice was strained, reaching for casual, falling well short. "Look, my authorized card just got declined at the ship's lounge. Is there some issue with the account?" I turned on the reading lamp. The 11 pages lay across the white comforter like exhibits at a trial. Page 7, Stillwater Ridge, sitting directly in the light. "Oh, I'm just doing some routine year-end financial accounting," I said, keeping my voice grandfatherly and calm. "Let me look into it for you. How's the cruise A pause?" "It's great. Alaska's beautiful." "Good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'll check on the card situation tomorrow. You enjoy every moment out there." "Thanks, Dad." I hung up before he could finish. Then I sat there in the dark bedroom looking at those 11 pages and smiled for the first time in days. My son was stranded on a ship fretting over a declined card, completely unaware that his entire institutionalization plan was spread out right there under my reading lamp. He thought this was a minor inconvenience, a temporary glitch his dependable father would sort out by morning. He had no idea I'd already removed him as an authorized user 3 days earlier, the moment I'd begun documenting the theft. He had no idea I knew about Stillwater Ridge, about the power of attorney draft, about Dalton's involvement, about any of it. I'd bought myself 6 more days before they even began to suspect. The following morning, I drove into downtown Philadelphia with all 11 pages sealed in a thick manila envelope. Gwendolyn's conference room had tall windows pulling in the morning light, falling across the broad oak table where she'd set out legal pads and 3 different colored pens. She took the envelope without a word, opened it, and began reading. She didn't speak for 10 consecutive minutes. I watched her expression tighten with each page. When she reached the Stillwater Ridge application page, 11, my name typed neatly on the prospective resident line, her jaw set hard. Finally, she placed the pages down and looked up. "This wasn't drafted by an amateur," she said. "It's a highly competent predatory structure. If you had signed it, I haven't signed anything." "Good, because whoever put this together knew exactly what they were doing. The power of attorney is durable and broad. The deed transfer is structured to avoid triggering gift tax scrutiny. The memory care facility is out of state, which makes jurisdictional challenges far more difficult." She tapped page 11. "This is professional-grade exploitation." "Brett's father-in-law has a real estate background," I said. "Dalton Fenley, Florida." Gwendolyn made a note. "I'll pull civil records. Florida real estate in the 2000s produced more than one creative legal predator." She reached for a fresh legal pad. "Here's what we're going to do." She wrote as she spoke, her pen moving with the precision of someone who'd built legal fortresses before. 4 distinct phases. First, we finalize the irrevocable trust immediately. I've already drafted it. The duplex transfers into the trust. You retain a life estate and the rental income, but the property itself becomes untouchable. The beneficiary is the scholarship fund in your wife's name. They cannot challenge it, cannot break it, cannot reach it. I nodded. Each legal mechanism she described was a load-bearing wall, something that once installed could not be removed without bringing the entire structure down. Second, she continued, we execute a new will. Your current will almost certainly names Brett as primary beneficiary, correct? We're removing him entirely. Everything flows to the trust. If you die tomorrow, he receives nothing. The scholarship fund continues in perpetuity. No probate vulnerabilities, no will contests that matter. Third, we revoke every piece of authorized access you've ever granted him. Credit cards, bank accounts, insurance policies, all of it. If his name appears anywhere in your financial life, we pull it today. She turned to a fresh page. Fourth, we formalize the rental arrangement at fair market rate. I checked comparable units in your neighborhood. It's approximately $2,400 a month for that size. 14-day notice to clear the basement of stored items. Everything in writing, everything documented. No more family favors. This becomes a standard landlord-tenant relationship governed by Pennsylvania law. I looked at the 4 numbered items on her legal pad. Clean, logical, structurally sound. How long, I asked. The trust can be executed this week. I need your signature and a notary. The will, same timeline. Account access revocations, you can handle most of those today by phone and online. The lease I'll draft tonight. You can serve it when he gets back from the cruise. They return November 28th. I said, perfect. That gives us 10 days to seal off every vulnerability they were planning to exploit. She leaned forward. But here's the critical part, and I need you to hear me clearly. Do not sign so much as a grocery receipt if they hand one to you. Nothing, no matter how harmless it looks. If Petra asks you to sign for a package delivery, you politely decline. If Brett needs a co-signer on anything, the answer is no. They drafted an 11-page plan they're not going to stop just because one credit card got declined. I understand. Do you? Her voice eased slightly. Because the moment they realize you know this gets ugly. Right now, you have the advantage of appearing ignorant. Once that's gone, they'll escalate. I thought of Brett's strained voice at 100 in the morning, asking about the declined card, still believing his father would fix it. Let them escalate, I said. I'll be ready. Gwendolyn studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Then, let's build your fortress. I drove home through the late morning traffic with her legal pad notes on the passenger seat. 4 distinct phases, clean, logical, structurally sound. I finally had a blueprint of my own. Over the following 48 hours, I worked through Gwendolyn's checklist with surgical precision. The first dependency I dismantled was the authorized user card. I called the bank at precisely 9 o'clock Monday morning and reported it lost, triggering an immediate, irreversible administrative freeze. The woman on the phone was professionally sympathetic. I'll cancel that card right away, Mr. Chadwick. Would you like us to issue a replacement? No, thank you. I won't be needing an authorized user going forward. Understood. The account is now updated. Is there anything else I can help you with today? That's all, thank you. I hung up and checked it off the list. Next, insurance. I called the company that held both duplex units under a single policy and requested a split. My unit only separate coverage effective immediately. The agent asked whether the other unit would need its own policy. That's the tenant's responsibility now. Of course, I'll process the change today. Another check mark. The grocery delivery service took 3 minutes. I removed my payment method from the shared account, which automatically shifted billing responsibility to the secondary account holder. An automated email confirmed the change within seconds. The cleaning service was even faster. I logged in, deleted my credit card from the profile, and watched the system fire off a payment update notification to the alternate email on file. Every digital password I'd ever shared, streaming services, utility portals, HOA, website access. I changed them one by one, methodically logging each change in a spreadsheet with timestamps. By Tuesday afternoon, my home office looked like mission control. Laptop, running 6 account windows at once, phone on speaker. Cycling through hold music, coffee gone cold in its mug. But the list was shrinking. How many anchors had I let them drill into my foundation over 5 years, mistaking generosity for love? The final item on Gwendolyn's checklist was the basement storage notice. I opened a new email, typed carefully. Brett, hope the cruise is going well. Since I need the basement for my own projects, please clear all personal items from the shared storage area by December 4th. I've transferred the shared account access to your individual emails. Thanks, Dad. I read it 3 times. Polite, reasonable, utterly without accusation or emotion. Then I printed it, signed it, and sent it via USPS, certified mail with return receipt. Requested the only method Pennsylvania landlord-tenant law recognizes as statutory notice. The post office confirmation slip came back 2 days later. Delivered. Timestamp. November 21st, 2023. I settled back in my office chair and looked at the completed checklist. Every bolt loosened, every anchor lifted, every dependency cut. With each one, I'd seen more clearly just how much of my own infrastructure I had quietly allowed them to colonize without ever being asked. The credit card, the insurance, the groceries, the cleaning service, the storage space. Layer after layer of my foundation, silently repurposed to support a structure I had never agreed to carry. I closed the laptop and turned off the desk lamp. It was done. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and looked at the frame wedding photograph on the nightstand. Elise gazed back at me from 1988, 36 years old, in the white dress she'd chosen herself, smiling like someone who'd just won an argument, which she had because I'd wanted a courthouse wedding and she'd held out for the full ceremony. She'd been right. She was always right. The amber glow of the street lamp outside seeped through the bedroom curtains, catching the silver frame just enough for me to make out her face. Did I make it too easy for him? Elise, I whispered into the quiet room. Did comfort become a cage? Did I give him so much that he forgot how to carry his own weight? She didn't answer. She'd been gone for 2 years. Cancer had taken her the way it takes everyone slowly then, all at once until the hospital room smelled like antiseptic, and her hand felt like paper in mine. But I remembered what she'd said 5 years ago, maybe 6 months before the diagnosis came back terminal. We'd been sitting in the kitchen and she'd set her coffee down with that deliberate care that meant she was choosing her words. Rowan Brett has a good heart, but Petra looks at people like assets to be managed. Be careful. I'd brushed it off, told her she was being overprotective, that Petra was just practical, that young couples needed structure, that she was reading too much into normal financial planning. Elise had been dying then, and I convinced myself grief was making her paranoid. God, I'd been such a fool. I picked up the photograph and held it close enough to see the details in the low light. Her eyes, her smile, the way she'd looked at me, like I was the only structural engineer in the entire world who mattered. The grief hit me. Then not the sharp kind from 2 years ago, when she died, but the deep crushing weight of missing her wisdom, missing her voice, missing the way she could see straight through a person's financial spreadsheets to the balance sheet of their character. I cried quietly in the darkness, not from fear, not self-pity, but from the sheer weight of having ignored her instincts when they mattered most, and now facing the consequences alone in a house that still carried the faint trace of her perfume on quiet nights, when the heating system kicked on just right. I wiped my face in the dark. Elise hadn't built me up across 35 years just to watch me crumble. She'd been tougher than me, sharper than me. She'd grown up poor in Allentown, put herself through community college, working nights at a grocery store, and became an accountant who could spot financial manipulation from 3 spreadsheets away. She'd chosen to love me in spite of my habit of seeing the best in people long after the evidence said otherwise. And she'd warned me. I set the photograph back on the nightstand, the frame settling into the small ring of dust where it always rested. I stood up from the bed. She expected me to stand, and standing was exactly what structural engineers do best. By Sunday, I'd learned to stand without leaning on memory. The grief was still there, but so was the foundation. 2 days later, on a gray Sunday afternoon, my phone rang while I was eating a solitary sandwich. Gwendolyn's direct office line, the number she used only when she'd found something that couldn't hold until Monday. I put the call on speaker. I've been running background on Dalton Fenley, she said without preamble, using Pacer Federal Database and Florida State Civil Archives. I set down my sandwich. What did you find? Dalton was the primary defendant in a large civil real estate fraud lawsuit in Broward County, Florida, back in 2007. Elderly plaintiff, a widower, who'd brought Dalton in to help manage his investment properties after his wife died. Dalton systematically transferred titles, forged signatures, drained rental income accounts. The case took 3 years to settle. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest. How much he lost the judgment and was ordered to pay $340,000 in restitution. The files are entirely public record. I've already pulled the certified copies from the clerk's office. $340,000. Elderly plaintiff. Public record. Dalton thought he'd been managing a simple grieving old man. He had no idea I was sitting on the full wreckage of his past. So, this is his signature style, I said quietly. He's done this before. Professional predator with a documented pattern. Exactly, and the pattern lines up with what they attempted with you, almost point for point. Win trust through family ties, identify a window of vulnerability following a spouse's passing, engineer financial dependency to secure legal control, execute the property transfer. Did he serve time? Civil case, not criminal. He paid partial restitution through bankruptcy restructuring and relocated out of Florida not long after. The judgment still follows him, but collecting across state lines is another matter. She paused. What matters is that this establishes predatory intent. If they ever move to claim you're incompetent, or that their whole scheme was just innocent family, help we put before the court, that Dalton has a documented record of going after elderly widowers for estate exploitation. I stared out the kitchen window at the gray November sky. Somewhere in Alaska, Dalton was raising a glass of champagne in a cabin I'd paid for, probably congratulating himself on finding a soft target. A grief-worn engineer with a duplex and a retirement nest egg, no wife left to ask hard questions, a dependent son to open the door. He'd misjudged me. Keep those documents in the front folder, I said. We'll bring them forward when the moment is right. Already done. I'll send you the summary by email tonight. Thank you, Gwendolyn. That's what you pay me for. She hung up. I sat at the kitchen island for a long moment, staring at my half-eaten roast beef cheddar horseradish sandwich. The pieces were locking into place with the kind of precision you'd expect from a well-engineered structure. Dalton's history, the asset transition plan, the Stillwater Ridge memory care application, Petra's financial calculations, Brett's convenient silence. This wasn't improvisation. This was Dalton's playbook sharpened over decades and deployed against a target he was sure was too isolated and too grief-hollowed to push back. I picked up my sandwich and took another bite. Then, at 3:14 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Petra. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Hi, Rowan. Her voice carried that honeyed lilt she reached for whenever she wanted something. But underneath it, I caught the tightness, a current of anxiety running below the surface. Brett noticed some administrative changes on the online banking portal. Is everything all right down there? Does Brett need to call the branch? I leaned back against the kitchen counter, phone in hand. Oh, hello, Petra. Everything is perfectly fine. Just reorganizing my year-end accounts. Once you hit 60, you understand you need to keep your affairs in order. A pause. I could almost hear her recalibrating. What kind of reorganizing? Standard financial housekeeping. Nothing that needs your attention. How's Alaska? Are you getting to see the glaciers? It's beautiful. The honey had drained from her voice. Rowan, you really should be talking to Brett before making major financial moves like that. He handles your authorized access for a reason. And there it was. The assumption of control delivered like settled fact. It's my name on the title, Petra. I said, keeping my voice even but firm. I've always managed my own infrastructure. That hasn't changed just because I turned 60. Enjoy the glaciers. Tell Brett I hope he's getting some rest. I hung up before she could answer. Then I walked to my laptop, opened the evidence log, and entered a new record. November 23rd, 3:14 p.m. Petra called from the cruise ship under the pretense of account concern, attempted to reassert financial oversight. Voice patterns indicate rising anxiety, probing to gauge defensive timeline. Deflected with grandfatherly reassurance. I saved the entry and leaned back. She was testing the foundation, tapping on the walls, listening for hollow spots where her leverage used to live, checking whether I was still the obliging father-in-law who nodded along to her polished household management, or whether something had quietly shifted while they were out celebrating at sea. The call had lasted 97 seconds. In that time, she'd handed me 3 critical pieces of information. They were monitoring my accounts from a distance. They assumed consultation rights over my own finances. And they were rattled enough to break operational discipline by calling from the ship. People who are confident in their schemes don't make check-in calls from luxury vacations. People who are confident wait until they're home, gather what they need, quietly adjust their timeline. Petra wasn't confident anymore. She was worried. I set the phone down and looked out at the gray November sky. Petra was losing sleep in her luxury cabin, 1,200 miles away, on a ship she'd bought with my money. And people who panic make predictable mistakes. The first one came 3 days later. On Wednesday afternoon, I stepped into the shared utility office to find my spare set of commercial padlocks when something on the high bookshelf caught my eye. Something that would change everything. An old Motorola smartphone sat on the top shelf, a charging cable snaking down to the outlet below. I stopped, Brett's old corporate work device, the one his firm had replaced weeks earlier when they upgraded to newer models. He'd mentioned leaving it in the shared office as a backup, then apparently forgotten it was there. I dragged over the stepladder and brought it down. The screen lit when I pressed the power button, still charged, still functional. I tried the old pattern lock. I remembered watching him use 4 corners clockwise and it opened. The home screen had a handful of basic apps. I tapped the voice recorder icon. One unlabeled file dated October 28th, 2023, 3 weeks before my birthday, 3 weeks before the Alaska cruise pitch. I pressed play. Static for a few seconds, then a voice clear and unmistakable. Once he executes the durable power of attorney, the entire duplex falls under our management company. We list it for sale immediately and split the equity 50-50. Dalton's voice answered, slightly muffled but recognizable. What's the assessed value? 480,000 market rates, probably closer to 520 given the location. We clear the mortgage payoff, split the rest. That's about 260 each after fees. And the rental income while we're positioning goes into the LLC operating account. I've already got the paperwork drafted. Just needs his signature on the power of attorney to activate everything. A pause, papers rustling, then Dalton's voice quieter. And what about the old man? 4 seconds of absolute silence. I stood there in the dusty office phone in hand, listening to that silence stretch out like a held breath. 4 seconds. Then Brett's voice came back, cold, matter of fact. Stillwater Ridge. Memory care handles everything. More conversation followed, logistics about the facility, timeline discussions, Dalton mentioning his Florida contacts. But I'd stopped hearing words. I was still stuck on those 4 seconds. 4 seconds to decide whether your father lives free or gets forgotten in a Wisconsin facility 1,200 miles from home. I backed up the recording and played that passage again. And what about the old man's silence? 1, 2, 3, 4. Stillwater Ridge memory. Care handles everything. I played it a 3rd time. That silence wasn't hesitation. It wasn't uncertainty. It was deliberation. My son had weighed my life against his profit margin and chosen the profit. I checked the file duration, 18 minutes, 42 seconds. I listened to all of it. By the end, I held a complete blueprint of their conspiracy. Dalton's role as architect, the management LLC structure, the timeline power of attorney and November facility placement, by February property sale by spring, and Brett's casual acknowledgement that I'd never question any of it because I always signed whatever he put in front of me. That last part was delivered like a clinical character assessment. Accurate. He'd been right until now. I switched off the phone and stood in the dim utility office for a long moment, turning over what I was holding. Then I climbed the stepladder, set the phone back exactly where I'd found it, matching the dust outline and the precise angle of the charging cable, and went to my private office. At 11 o'clock that night, I sat at my desk with 3 encrypted flash drives and my laptop open across multiple secure networks. I connected the old Motorola, copied the 18-minute file to my computer, then systematically duplicated it to 3 separate fortresses. An encrypted local hardware drive locked in my home safe. A secure email to Gwendolyn's private legal server with a password-protected attachment. A secure cloud storage folder with 2-factor authentication. Then I called Gwendolyn. She picked up on the 2nd ring. "It's 11 p.m., Rowan. This had better be important. I need you to listen to something." I played the audio over the phone line, all 18 minutes. When it ended, there was a long pause. Rowan. Her voice had shifted quieter, harder. "Where did you get this?" Brett's old work phone left in the shared office, still recording from October. Another pause. I could hear her working through the implications. "Ethically, you have total leverage here," she said at last. "But I have to advise you, Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state for recordings. This would very likely be inadmissible in court. If you try to introduce it as evidence, they could allege illegal wiretapping. I don't need a Judge Gwendolyn. I just need them to know that I know." "Then it's an absolute checkmate," she said quietly. "Within your own home, with no legal proceedings involved. This recording is devastating. You play this for him, and he has nowhere to go. No excuses, no deflection, just his own voice consigning you to institutional care. I didn't need legal vindication. I needed him to hear his own voice sealing my fate, and to watch his face the moment he understood I'd been listening all along. "Keep the copy I sent you," I said. "Encrypted, separate from the trust documents. Already done. Rowan, When are they back from the cruise? November 30th. 4 more days. Good. That gives you time to get ready. When you confront him with this, make sure it's just the two of you. No Petra, no Dalton, just you and Brett. Let him hear what he sounds like when he believes nobody's listening. I will. And Rowan, don't destroy him. Just hold up the mirror. Sometimes that's enough. I hung up and sat in the dark office looking at the 3 encrypted drives lined up on my desk, like rounds of ammunition. It took my son exactly 4 seconds to condemn his own father to an institution. And it took me exactly 4 seconds to decide his future. The only question remaining was when to play it for him. The answer settled over me in those last quiet days, not when that was already decided. How? During the final stretch of November, while a cruise ship worked its way down the Alaskan coast, I kept a perfectly unremarkable routine, the kind of deliberate steadiness that only comes from a man who has already made every decision that matters. On the 27th, I met Clyde Osgood at our usual corner booth in the neighborhood diner. Morning light came through the windows and caught the steam curling up from porcelain mugs of black coffee. The smell of bacon drifted out from the kitchen. Clyde 61 had retired from the Postal Service 3 years back and still caught up with me for coffee every few weeks, usually with a sports page spread between us, like a comfortable buffer against the need for deep conversation. He looked up from the Red Sox column. "Hey, I thought the kids took you to Alaska for the Big 60, he said. "How come you're still here?" I took a slow sip, black bitter grounding. They needed their own space, Clyde. Besides, I'm currently laying the groundwork for an entirely different kind of journey. He studied me a moment, the quiet, intuitive red that comes from 30 years of friendship. He could tell something was in motion. He had the good sense not to push. "Well," he said at last, folding the paper, "whatever you're putting together, I hope the foundation's solid." "It is." Clyde gave me a slow nod and returned to his sports page. Some structures are built in complete silence before they're ever revealed to anyone. I finished my coffee-left cash on the table and walked home through the November chill, feeling more settled than I had in weeks. Not from anger, not from spite, from the quiet assurance of a man whose footings are poured deep and have had time to cure. The next 2 days were methodical. I reviewed Gwendolyn's legal documents one final time. I organized the evidence log into chronological sections with timestamps and screenshots. I labeled 3 sealed envelopes and placed them in my desk drawer in order of deployment. I checked the forecast. December 1st would be cold and clear. Good. I wanted perfect visibility for what came next. On the afternoon of November 30th, I knew they were back not from a text or a phone call, but from sound. The heavy air brakes of a commercial airport shuttle hissed outside my kitchen window at 4:30 p.m. I stood well back in the shadow of the blinds and watched. The whole entourage unloaded not just Brett and Petra, but Dalton and Miriam as well, hauling heavy luggage across the gravel driveway. All 4 of them looked drained, their faces tight, with something that went deeper than jet lag. The vacation had clearly turned. Brett grabbed 2 large suitcases. Petra carried a designer bag along with what looked like shopping bags from cruiseport gift shops. Dalton and Miriam moved slower, older their matching silver luggage scraping over the gravel with the sound of wheels that had been through too many airports. Nobody came over to my side of the duplex. Nobody knocked. Nobody called out a hello or acknowledged me standing 20 feet away behind a shared wall. Petra said something sharp low to Brett. I couldn't catch the words through the glass, but I could read the tension running through her posture. Brett nodded slowly, then sent a strange calculating look toward my front door. The kind of look a man gives when he's measuring a problem he assumed he'd already put to rest. Dalton said something that made Miriam shake her head. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow, as if she'd spent 2 weeks coming to understand exactly what kind of man she'd married and what kind of scheme he'd pulled her daughter into. They filed through the front door one by one, luggage catching on the frame, and the duplex fell quiet again. I stayed there another 5 minutes watching the empty driveway. Behind me on my desk, 3 sealed envelopes sat in a neat stack. Beside them, the legal folders Gwendolyn had prepared. Next to those, a copy of the 18-minute audio recording on a plain flash drive. Everything in order, everything documented, everything ready. Tomorrow, December. First the first envelope, the first confrontation. I thought about the 16 days since they'd boarded that plane without me. 16 days of systematic documentation, removing authorized access, securing the trust, uncovering Dalton's fraud conviction, finding the audio recording building, a legal fortress. while they celebrated at sea on my money. They thought they were coming home to a compliant father who'd been sitting here missing them, maybe nursing some hurt feelings about the canceled ticket, but ultimately ready to sign whatever they put in front of him. They had no idea what they were walking into. I let the blind slat drop back into place and turned away from the window. In the kitchen, I made a simple dinner, ate it slowly, washed the single plate and fork dried them, put them away. At 9 o'clock, I settled into my living room armchair with Elise's wedding photo on the end table beside me, visible in the lamplight. Tomorrow, I said quietly to the empty room, they'll finally see the structure I built while they were away. The house was still, except for the familiar creaks and settling sounds of old wood. Through the wall, I could make out muffled voices, Petra's sharp tone, Brett's quieter answers, Dalton's occasional interjection. They were unpacking planning, probably rehearsing whatever script they had drafted for requesting my signature on documents they never imagined I'd question. I sat there and listened until the voices stopped and the lights went dark on their side. Then I went upstairs, set my alarm for 5 in the morning, and lay down fully dressed on top of the covers. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. They were back inside the perimeter. Perfect. I had spent 16 days measuring the load-bearing limits of this family, calculating precisely how much pressure each joint could take before catastrophic failure. The stress test begins tomorrow morning. Tomorrow became today at precisely 5 o'clock. On the morning of December 1st, I woke not to an alarm, but to the clear-headed calm of a man with 2 critical operations to carry out before a single light came on across the wall. First, the envelope. I dressed in the darkness, picked up the sealed legal document from my desk, and crossed barefoot over the cold hardwood to Brett's front door. Pre-dawn silence hung over the duplex like a held breath. I slid the envelope through his mail slot. A formal lease agreement setting, rent at $2,400 per month. Effective January, first complete with standard statutory disclosures and landlord obligations. No emotional explanations, no accusations, just figures, deadlines, and Pennsylvania general law citations. The envelope disappeared with a soft click. I walked back to my kitchen, started the coffee maker, and waited. At exactly 7 o'clock, the professional moving truck arrived. I'd hired them 3 days earlier, a licensed bonded crew that specialized in residential storage relocation. They knew the law better than most attorneys. I met them at the basement door with the printed inventory and the certified email I'd sent on November 21st, giving statutory 14-day notice. The crew chief, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, scanned the list and gave a nod. Standard non-dwelling storage clearance, he said. We'll have everything cataloged, packed, and staged within 90 minutes. You want it tarped in the backyard or moved to a storage facility backyard. Commercial-grade tarps. I want everything protected but visible. Understood. They worked with mechanical efficiency. Every item Brett had stored in my basement over 5 years' winter gear holiday decorations, old furniture boxes of files, went into heavy-duty commercial crates. Each crate was labeled, photographed, logged. I stood in the kitchen doorway with my phone, recording everything timestamps running. By 8:30, the basement was empty, and the backyard looked like the staging area for a professional moving operation. Blue tarps secured everything against the December weather. The crew chief handed me a complete manifest. A sign here for completion of services. I signed. The truck pulled away at 8:45. I walked back into my kitchen, poured a fresh cup of black coffee, sat down, facing the front door, and waited for the reaction. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9:15, the storm arrived. The knocking was violent and undisciplined, the kind of furious pounding that rattled the doorframe and made plain that whoever stood on the other side had already lost control. I set down my coffee, walked calmly to the door, and opened it. What I'm about to share with you changed the entire shape of what came next, and it put me face to face with just how far my own son had been willing to go. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved was quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew? Or would you stay silent and let your actions speak for themselves? Brett stood on my threshold, face-flushed hands shaking as he gripped the crumpled envelope in a white-knuckled fist. "What the hell is this, Dad?" His voice cracked on the last word. $2,400 a month. And why is all our winter gear sitting out in the yard under a tarp? I kept my posture easy, one hand resting on the doorframe. $2,400 is the current fair market rate for a 2-bedroom duplex in this zip code, I said calmly. You're welcome to cross-reference it on Zillow. As for the basement, you received statutory 14-day written notice by certified email on November 21st. Don't worry about the weather. Those are industrial-grade commercial tarps rated for 6 months of outdoor exposure. His mouth opened and closed twice without producing a word. Then Petra shouldered past him, eyes flashing with something caught between fury and calculation. "Rowan, this is family," she said, her voice clipped and tight. "You cannot legally treat your own son like some random tenant." I looked directly at her, held her stare, with the kind of settled calm that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. "You're right, Petra. This is family. But this side of the house operates under a written lease, separate insurance liabilities, and independent utility accounts. That's how adults share a roof. It's also how landlords protect themselves from liability." This is insane," Brett said, his voice climbing. "You're charging us market rate after everything. After everything." "Yes, I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The lease begins January 1st. You have 30 days to decide whether you'd like to continue as tenants under standard Pennsylvania rental law, or whether you'd prefer to find alternative housing. Either choice is perfectly acceptable." Petra's expression shifted. The fury drained out of her face, replaced by something colder, something that looked like recognition. "What changed?" she asked quietly. "What happened while we were gone?" "Nothing changed," I said. "I simply started treating my property like property and my relationships like relationships. Those two things were never meant to be the same category." She held my gaze for a long moment, and I watched the calculations running behind her eyes. She was cycling through scenarios, testing variables, searching for whichever pressure point would move me back to the compliant position I'd held for 5 years. She'd arrived believing she held every card. She was only now understanding that I'd been playing from a completely different deck. "We'll be speaking to a lawyer," she said at last. "That's your right. My attorney's contact information is in the lease packet, page 7. She's expecting calls." I paused. "Is there anything else? I have a conference call at 10 o'clock. Brett looked at me like he was staring at a stranger. "Dad, I don't understand. We've always... What, Brett? Always assumed my generosity was something you were owed. Always treated my foundation like it existed purely to support your structure." I kept my voice level measured. "The basement is cleared, the lease is delivered, and the utilities have been separated. Everything else is just details." I stepped back and began closing the door. Petra put her hand out and stopped it. "We're not finished here," she said. "Actually, we are for now. The lease terms are non-negotiable. If you have legal questions, contact Gwendolyn Ashford. If you have personal questions, we can arrange a conversation at a mutually convenient time." But this doorstep discussion is over. I closed the door and stood there listening to the silence on the other side. Then footsteps, retreating harsh whispers I couldn't quite make out. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my coffee. Still warm? Petra's face had worn an expression I'd never seen on her before, the sudden desperate look of a gambler who realizes the deck has been swapped mid-hand. She'd come to rattle an old man. She left having met a structural engineer who knew exactly where every load-bearing wall stood. Petra walked away with her face still tight with panic. But Dalton wasn't finished. They retreated to their side of the house after the morning confrontation. But at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the knock returned this time, softer, measured, deliberate. The sound of someone who believed they were about to seize control of the negotiation. I opened the door. Dalton stood there with Miriam beside him, offering his practice Florida broker's smile and a firm corporate handshake. "May we come in for a moment?" he said. "I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning." I stepped aside and led them to my formal living room, arranged 3 chairs in a triangle around the low mahogany table, made tea porcelain cups, proper service, the kind of hospitality that puts people at ease before you dismantle them. Dalton settled into his chair with the comfortable posture of a man who'd closed 1,000 deals. Miriam sat beside him, quiet as always, hands folded in her lap. I poured the tea and sat across from them. "Rowan?" Dalton began, his voice carrying that smooth corporate warmth he'd likely been polishing for decades. "Let's talk like reasonable men of the world. There was some tension this morning, but I believe we can find common ground." I sipped my tea and said nothing. "Brett is dealing with a temporary liquidity crunch," Dalton went on, leaning forward slightly. "A minor asset investment that didn't yield as expected happens to the best of us in this economy. What matters is that families close ranks when there's a storm. We support one another. That's what family means." He paused, waiting for me to agree. I didn't. The lease you delivered this morning, he said, shifting approach. It's legally sound, I'll give you that. But it's also, well, it's harsh. $2,400 a month for your own son. That's not how families operate. That's how landlords operate. I am a landlord, I said calmly. This is my property. Of course, of course. Dalton's smile held steady. But consider the optics. Consider what this does to family unity. Brett and Petra have been good tenants for 5 years. They've kept up the property. They've been considerate neighbors. Surely that counts for something. I let him talk. Didn't cut him off once. I let him lay out his entire case, stack up every justification, build the full architecture of his pitch, because I needed him to commit completely before I pulled the foundation out from under it. What I'm proposing, Dalton said, warming to his argument now, is a compromise. Hold the rent at the family rate. Say $1,200, split the difference. In exchange, Brett takes on more property maintenance, landscaping, minor repairs, that sort of thing. Everyone benefits. You get help keeping up the property. They get affordable housing. The family stays whole. He leaned back, clearly satisfied with what he'd constructed. Miriam gave a small nod beside him, the look of someone who'd heard this script before. Dalton watched me expectantly. I set down my teacup. Let the silence stretch out for a moment. Then I leaned forward. I completely understand asset volatility, Dalton. I said, my voice perfectly level. Markets shift, investments disappoint. These things happen to reasonable men of the world. He smiled, certain I was coming around. But I have a structural question for you, I continued. Broward County, Florida, 2007. Civil fraud judgment, $340,000 in restitution. Elderly widower plaintiff who hired you to manage his investment properties after his wife passed. Dalton's face drained of color completely, as though someone had opened a valve and let everything run out. Would you like to explain how that transition plan worked? I said quietly. Or should I simply print the federal court archive and hand it to Brett myself? Miriam gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. The room went into absolute silence. Dalton's corporate smile was gone. His polished broker manner had evaporated. What remained was a 62-year-old con artist sitting in the wreckage of his carefully built credibility. He started. You systematically transferred property titles, I said. Forged signatures, drained rental income accounts. The case took 3 years to settle. You paid partial restitution through bankruptcy restructuring and relocated out of state to avoid collection. I picked up my tea and took a slow sip. The interesting part, I continued, is how closely your 2007 playbook mirrors the 11-page asset transition plan I found in my printer last month, including the detail of having Hayden take my cabin reservation, making sure I missed that flight and had no way to disrupt your timeline in person. Same structure, same target profile. Elderly widower recently bereaved, financially stable, a trusting family member providing access. The only difference is, you've refined the execution over the years. Dalton stood up his chair, scraping hard against the hardwood floor. This conversation is over, he said, voice tight. You're right, I agreed. It is. But before you go, let me be clear. I have certified copies of every public document related to your Broward County conviction. If you or Miriam or Petra attempt any further manipulation of my son, any further schemes involving my estate, I will make sure Brett receives a thorough education in his father-in-law's professional history. They had walked into my living room, certain they held the blueprints. They left knowing I'd been holding their criminal record the entire time. Dalton stood up without finishing his tea. Miriam followed him out, like a shadow, her face still pale with shock. I stayed seated and finished mine. Dalton and Miriam were gone within the hour. I watched their taxi pull away from the duplex with luggage stacked high, heading back to whatever life they'd assembled in Florida on the wreckage of their last scheme. That evening around 8 o'clock, there was a single hesitant knock at my kitchen door. So unlike the morning's violent pounding, that I knew without opening it who stood there, and that he'd come alone. I opened the door. Brett stood on the threshold, hands in his pockets, shoulders drawn in against the December cold. No Petra behind him. No rehearsed script, just my son looking smaller than I'd seen him in years. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I stepped aside. He crossed to the kitchen island and settled onto the same stool where he used to work through middle school algebra homework under that dim yellow light. I could still picture him there at 13, wrestling with equations, asking me to walk him through load-bearing calculations because those made more sense to him than abstract numbers. I pushed a cup of tea across to him. We sat without speaking for a full minute, maybe longer. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Finally, Brett looked down at his cup. "You found everything, didn't you?" he said, barely above a whisper. "Yes." Another suffocating silence. He wrapped both hands around the mug as though trying to draw warmth from it. "I owe $80,000 to a hard moneylender." He got the words out flat and defeated. Commercial development deal with some old college friends. We were going to flip a warehouse property in Camden. The permits fell through, the financing collapsed. The whole thing evaporated, but the loan didn't. He drew a shaky breath. Petra and her father said they had a legal vehicle to restructure your duplex equity and clear the debt. They framed it as reasonable, like estate planning, like we were simply helping you organize your assets for retirement. His voice cracked. "I knew it was wrong, Dad. I knew it, but I felt like I was drowning, and they threw me a rope, and I didn't stop to ask what it was tied to." I looked at my only son sitting in that dim yellow light and couldn't sort out whether I felt more love or more profound pity for him. "Perhaps those two things are exactly the same." "Brett," I said quietly, "I cannot pay your debts. I won't. That money is gone, and you have to find your own way out of that hole." He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "But I will never allow you to tear down the foundation your mother and I spent 30 years building. Not for Dalton's schemes, not for Petra's calculations, not even for your mistakes." He looked up then, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered. "You start by standing on your own feet," I said. "No more shortcuts, no more family equity as a safety net. You find work. You negotiate with your lender. You dig yourself out the same way every other 35-year-old does when a bad investment goes sideways. Petra won't go along with that. I don't care what Petra will or won't do." I said, my voice firm, but not cruel. "This is about you learning to carry your own weight. Your mother believed you could. I still do. But you have to prove it to yourself, not to me." He rose slowly, leaving the tea untouched. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know you are." He moved to the door and paused with his hand on the knob. Are we going to be okay?" I turned that over for a moment. "We're father and son," I said. "That doesn't change. But trust is a different kind of structure, and right now that foundation needs to be rebuilt from scratch." He nodded and left. I sat at the kitchen island for another hour, staring at the untouched cup across from me, feeling the weight of 35 years pressing down on my chest. The next morning, I stepped out to winterize the small garden boxes in the backyard. The air was bitter wind driving straight off the Atlantic and cutting through my jacket. I was kneeling beside the raised beds, pruning shears in hand, when I heard their side door slam. Petra marched across the frosty grass, dropping all pretense of sweetness. "You think you're a master strategist, Rowan?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "We have legal counsel on retainer. You cannot unilaterally alter a tenant at will agreement without going through an extensive housing court process." I set down the pruning shears and stood slowly brushing the dirt from my knees. "Petra, your attorney should review Pennsylvania general laws, Chapter 186, before they charge you another retainer fee. I've maintained real estate infrastructure in this Commonwealth for 35 years. I know the tenant statutes better than most housing court judges." Her teeth chattered slightly from the cold, but her voice sharpened with desperation. "When you're sick," she said, stepping closer. "When you're old and helpless in this house, don't look across the hallway for help. You'll be completely on your own." I held her gaze, didn't blink, didn't flinch. "Petra, you gave me your definitive answer to that question at Terminal B on November 14th. You boarded a plane on a ticket I paid for and left me standing at gate B22 with a canceled reservation. You don't ever need to repeat yourself. I understood perfectly well where I stand in your calculations." Her face cycled through several expressions in quick succession. Rage calculation. Something that might have been shame, then cold fury again. "This isn't over," she said. "Actually, it is. The lease is legal. The trust is finalized. The utilities are separated. The only question left is whether you'd like to continue as tenants under Pennsylvania law or find alternative housing. Either option is perfectly acceptable to me." She turned on her heel and stormed back inside, slamming their door hard enough to rattle the frame. I returned to my garden boxes, hands steady on the pruning shears. Some people believe they can win a structural war by shouting at the storm. They are always wrong. Petra stopped shouting after that morning, but silence isn't surrender. It just means they're regrouping. The next afternoon, I was sweeping pine needles from the front sidewalk when I heard footsteps on the concrete. And I told her, Rowan, the voice said. I said, Petra, that man has been nothing but a model neighbor for 6 years. And if his son needs a little tough love about money, well, that's just good parenting. I looked up. B. Whitaker stood at my gate, arms folded, wearing the same no-nonsense expression she'd carried for the 15 years she'd lived 3 houses down. B. 63 had retired from teaching high school English and developed a finely calibrated radar for when people were spreading nonsense in the neighborhood. I'm sorry, I said, setting down the broom. Petra came by yesterday afternoon. B said, walking up my path, uninvited but not unwelcome. Told me you were going through some kind of mental health crisis. Said you'd suddenly turned cruel and vindictive, that you were trying to evict your own son in the middle of a housing emergency. Something cold settled in my chest. And what did you say? I told her exactly what I just told you. B's smile was sharp. That you've been nothing but a model neighbor. That your lawn is always kept up. That you helped my husband fix our fence gate 3 summers ago without being asked. And that if your son needs to learn financial responsibility at 35, that's called parenting, not cruelty. I didn't know what to say. She didn't care for that much, B continued. Started going on about family loyalty and how young people are struggling in this economy. I told her my own daughter is 32 and pays her own rent in Collingswood, and somehow she manages without trying to claim her mother's house as an inheritance before I'm even in the ground. I almost smiled. Thank you, B. Don't thank me, I'm just telling you the truth. She glanced toward Brett's side of the duplex. Whatever's happening over there is your business. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in this neighborhood is buying what she's selling. Some of us remember when you lost a lease, and we watched you handle that with dignity. We trust your judgment. She gave my arm one firm pat and walked back down the path. Oh, she called back over her shoulder. I'm bringing this up at book club Thursday, just so you know. I watched her go, then looked down at the pile of pine needles I'd been sweeping. Petra had tried to turn the neighborhood against me, and it had reversed on her. Not because I defended myself, but because 15 years of being a decent neighbor had built a foundation she couldn't chip away with 3 days of desperate storytelling. The December cold had sharpened. Frost was forming on the gate latch, and I could see my breath in the late afternoon air. The seasonal shift felt deliberate, as if the weather itself was marking the turn from preparation into confrontation. I finished sweeping the pine needles into a precise pile, the methodical work steadying me before what I knew was coming that night. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Gwendolyn, it's done, she said without preamble. The irrevocable trust is officially recorded and active as of 4 o'clock this afternoon. The duplex is now legally held by the Elise Hargrove Foundation Trust, structured exactly as we designed it. I sat down at my desk, phone pressed to my ear. Walk me through it one more time. The property title transferred to the trust this afternoon. You retain life estate, meaning you can live there until you die and collect all rental income. But the property itself belongs to the foundation now. The income flows to the trust. The foundation bylaws are locked, and any legal challenge would require proving fraud or undue influence, which doesn't exist because we have your competency evaluation on file. And if I die tomorrow, the scholarship fund continues in perpetuity. Brett inherits nothing from the property. It's permanent, Rowan. Irrevocable means irrevocable. I close my eyes. Thank you, Gwendolyn. You're welcome. Now, get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be difficult. She hung up. I sat at my desk for a long moment, then drew 2 manila folders from the drawer. The first held the complete asset transition plan, all 11 pages I'd pulled from the printer tray, showing precisely how they'd intended to institutionalize me and liquidate my estate. The second held the foundation charter and the recorded trust deed showing exactly how I'd made their plan permanently impossible. I labeled both folders in my engineer's print. Then I took out a blank note card and wrote 2:30 p.m. final accounting. I set it on top of the folders. The phrase felt right. This wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning, a final accounting of what they'd attempted and what it had cost them. As I organized the desk, my hand caught the back of a drawer, and something slid forward. An old photograph. Brett at 7 years old, grinning and gripping a fishing rod on our Lake Wallenpaupack trip. His front teeth were missing. His hair was sun-bleached. He looked so small, so trusting, so certain his father could solve anything the world threw at him. I held that photo for 3 seconds and felt the full weight of 35 years pressing down. Then I closed the drawer and went back to labeling the folders. Grief is not a reason to abandon accountability. By 10 o'clock, everything was ready. The folders sat in a neat stack on my desk. The note card rested on top. The trust was recorded. The evidence was documented. The 20-day countdown that had begun on November 14th at Terminal B was complete. I sat alone in my study folders, organized the house silent around me. I felt no triumph, no anger, no fear. Only the crystalline certainty of a man who had built something fair and watched it be rejected. Tomorrow, they would learn what they had traded away for their greed. I switched off the desk lamp and went upstairs. The last 24 hours of the old equilibrium passed in darkness. I pressed send at 8:14 a.m. 7 words. 1 meeting time, 0 explanation. 2 p.m. Today living room, both of you. My thumb hovered over the screen for 3 seconds after the message delivered. Double check mark. Read receipt enabled. Brett would see it within minutes, seconds maybe if Petra was already monitoring his notifications, the way she monitored everything else in their carefully constructed world. The reply came at 8:17 a.m. Should Petra be there? What's this about 3 minutes? Not 3 hours, not 30 minutes? 3 minutes on a Thursday morning when he should have been sitting in his first project meeting at the engineering firm, which meant he'd been waiting watching. The desperation had reached critical mass. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and poured a second cup of coffee I didn't need. My hands were steady. That surprised me. 6 hours until the confrontation I'd been building toward for 3 weeks, and my pulse felt like I was reviewing blueprints for a municipal water system, not preparing to detonate my family. The morning stretched like a held breath, every minute deliberate. I didn't reply to the text. Let him wonder. Let Petra's prosecutor mind cycle through scenarios, catalog possibilities, draft arguments against phantoms. They'd spent weeks, maybe months, treating me like a problem, to be managed, an asset to be liquidated, a signature to be obtained. Now they could spend 6 hours inside the same uncertainty they'd tried to manufacture for me. At 9:30, I walked through the house one final time. Living room, 3 chairs arranged in a triangle around the mahogany coffee table Elise and I bought in 1994. Dining room cleared neutral, kitchen clean. No dishes in the sink, no evidence of morning panic. Everything in its place, everything under control. The folder sat on the coffee table. Plain manila, 1-inch brad fasteners, professional label, asset transition, plan, Chadwick family. Inside their 11-page document with Petra's margin notes and Dalton's financial projections. Behind it, the recorded deed transferring the duplex to the irrevocable trust. Behind that, the foundation charter for the Elise Hargrove Memorial Scholarship Fund, already filed with the state. Not threats, completed facts. I'd learned that distinction from Gwendolyn during our second meeting. Don't tell them what you might do, she'd said, sliding the trust documents across her desk. Show them what you've already done. It removes their negotiating position entirely. At 11 o'clock, Clyde called. You doing okay? Fine, Rowan. I'm fine, Clyde. Really silence on the line, the kind that comes from 40 years of friendship. Call me after he finally said, doesn't matter what time, I will. I made a sandwich at noon, roast beef cheddar, horseradish, and ate exactly half before my appetite quit. The rest went into the refrigerator, wrapped in plastic. Waste not. That's what Elise always said. Her voice still clear in my memory, even though her photograph was the only proof she'd existed outside my head. At 1:30, I changed shirts. The Navy Oxford, not the charcoal. Elise said the Navy brought out my eyes, made me look trustworthy. I needed trustworthy today, not threatening. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. Exactly. They stood on the porch like strangers. Brett in his work clothes tie, loosened face drawn. Petra in her tailored pantsuit leather portfolio, under one arm expression, locked in professional neutrality. They'd come straight from their lives, interrupted their Thursday, rearranged their schedules for a mysterious summons. Good. Come in, I said. No hugs, no pleasantries. Petra's eyes swept the living room like she was cataloging evidence. The 3 chairs, the folder, my posture. Brett moved to kiss my cheek out of habit, then stopped when I stepped back. Sit, I said. They took the couch, I took the armchair facing them, the folder on the coffee table between us, like a referee. Dad, what's going on? Brett's voice carried an edge I'd heard twice before. Once when he wrecked my truck at 17. Once when Elise died, and he'd had to walk me through the funeral arrangements. Fear dressed up as concern. Petra set her portfolio on her lap. We push back meetings to be here. If there's something urgent, there is. I reached for the folder, felt the weight of their 11-page plan. The trust deed, the foundation charter. Felt the ache of what we used to be, father and son, family dinners, honest conversations, pressing against what we'd become. I speak first, I said. You speak when I'm done, not before. Petra's jaw tightened. Brett nodded. I opened the folder to the first page. Their asset transition plan, draft version 3, stared back at us. Petra's handwriting in the margins. Dr. Kemper diagnosis by February 1st and POA before spring closing. Do you recognize this? I asked. The color drained from Brett's face like someone had opened a valve. Petra's pupils constricted to pinpoints, her breathing, shallow, controlled. Neither spoke. I found it. November 30th, I continued. In the printer tray. You'd been reviewing it while I slept. Brett's mouth opened. No sound came out. I turned the page. The trust deed sat underneath official county seal, in the corner recording date, December 2nd, 2023, 2 days ago. The duplex address, the irrevocable trust designation, the scholarship fund as sole beneficiary. This is what's already happened, I said. Not what I'm threatening. Already happened. Petra leaned forward, scanning the document. Her attorney's training engaged automatically. She was reading the legal language, tracking the implications, calculating the damage. Brett finally found his voice. Dad, I wasn't finished. He stopped. I turned to the last page, the foundation charter. Elise Hargrove Memorial Scholarship Fund, dedicated to supporting first-generation civil engineering students. Initial endowment, the duplex property in its entirety, valued at $340,000. Board of Directors myself, Gwendolyn Ashford, Clyde Osgood. Notably absent, Brett Chadwick, Petra Chadwick. Everything you were counting on inheriting, I said quietly, is gone. It now belongs to students who actually need it. Students who won't fabricate a dementia diagnosis, forge power of attorney documents, or leave their father stranded at an airport gate. Petra's composure fractured. You can't. I already did. Brett's hands were trembling, visibly trembling. I sat there watching my son, my 35-year-old son, a man who'd engineered bridges and overseen million-dollar projects, shake like a boy caught with his hand in the till. For the first time in 35 years, I saw pure, unfiltered terror in his eyes. I let the silence hold for 5 seconds, watched that terror harden into something colder, more deliberate. Then I reached for the second folder and placed the first page face up on the table. Credit card statement. November charges highlighted in yellow, total circled in red, $31,000. Alaska cruise package, I said. 4 passengers, premium balcony suite, excursions in Juneau, Ketchikan Skagway, charged to my Visa while I sat at home eating turkey sandwiches. Brett's eyes locked onto the numbers. Petra leaned forward, her attorney's instincts already engaged, sorting, cataloging, assembling counter-arguments before I'd even finished. I set the next page down. Bank transfer records. $18,000 moved from my savings into your joint account. October 15th. The authorization signature wasn't mine. The bank confirmed that after I filed the fraud report. $2,200 for a storage unit lease taken out in my name. $1,400 for the Stillwater Ridge Memory Care application deposit. Dad, we can explain. Petra started. I placed one finger flat on the table. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. I am not finished. Her mouth closed. The prosecutor in her recognized a stronger position when she saw one. That told me everything she knew, exactly what was coming, was already calculating damage control rather than registering any genuine confusion. This wasn't surprise, it was exposure. I kept laying out pages the way a structural engineer presents blueprints, each document dated, highlighted, annotated. The forged power of attorney application, bearing my signature one that didn't match the exemplars I'd provided to Gwendolyn. The Stillwater Ridge intake questionnaire listing cognitive symptoms I had never exhibited. The consultation request with Dr. Kemper for a dementia diagnosis scheduled for February 1st, a diagnosis that didn't yet exist, but would be manufactured on demand. This, I said, placing a Wisconsin court filing on the table, is Dalton Fenley's 2007 bankruptcy and fraud judgment. Broward County, Florida. $340,000 for real estate investment fraud. I looked at Brett. Your father-in-law has a federal conviction for precisely the kind of financial manipulation you two were attempting with me. Petra's composure frayed at the edges. That was years ago. Dalton paid his debt. He paid 30 cents on the dollar through bankruptcy court, then relocated to Oconomowoc, Wisconsin to start over. The judgment still stands. The conviction still stands. And his name, I tapped the Stillwater Ridge application, appears right here as your financial advisor and co-signer on my institutional placement. Brett's hand moved toward the documents. I didn't stop him. He needed to see his own signature sitting next to the lie. He lifted the power of attorney form and stared at the forged signature, mine, but not mine. The pen pressure was off. The loop on the C, too wide. The descender on the second R, too short. His hands shook harder. I didn't, he whispered. Petra said you'd already agreed that you'd signed it at the attorney's office, that this was just the official copy. So you signed without reading it, I said, without verifying, without asking me directly. He set the paper down like it had burned him. I pulled my laptop from the messenger bag beside my chair and opened it. An audio file sat ready on the desktop. 18 minutes and 43 seconds of recorded conversation. Brett had recorded himself on his old work phone October 28th, 8 weeks before they even knew I'd found anything. There's one more piece of evidence, I said. Petra's entire body went rigid. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd been in that kitchen. She'd spoken those words. She'd plotted in my home while I lay in the dark listening through the baby monitor Clyde had lent me. I pressed play. Brett's voice filled the living room, thin through the laptop speakers, but unmistakably his. Once we have power of attorney, the duplex equity converts to liquid assets. We can pay off the credit card, settle my contractor debt, and still have enough for the down payment on the Maple Grove property. Petra's voice came next, cooler, more controlled. Timeline matters. We need the diagnosis before the spring closing. Stillwater Ridge intake is March 1st. That gives us February for Dr. Kemper to establish the medical record. Then a third voice, deeper, older, carrying the faint southern drawl I'd only heard once before at their wedding. Dalton Fenley. The beauty of memory care placement. Dalton said, is once he's in the facility, it handles everything. Medication compliance, routine, visitation logs. You control the narrative. I've seen it done cleanly a dozen times in Florida before the statute changes. When his recorded voice filled the room, Brett closed his eyes. Petra's jaw tightened. I watched them both and felt nothing but clarity. The recording continued, Petra asking about legal exposure, Dalton reassuring her that POA documents supersede prior wishes once cognitive decline is medically documented. Brett asking about the storage unit timeline, Dalton suggesting they begin moving his belongings out gradually before I noticed to sidestep any confrontation. The reveal came at minute 16, Dalton's voice casual and unhurried. Your father won't see it coming, son. Men like him engineers military types. They trust systems, trust documentation. He'll sign whatever you put in front of him if you frame it as protecting the family legacy. Brett opened his eyes and stared at me. Opened his mouth. No words came. The recording ran another 2 minutes discussion of liquidation schedules, institutional costs, projected asset distribution. Then Brett's voice barely a whisper. He'll never see it coming. I closed the laptop. The click landed like a gunshot in the silent room. The quiet after that lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted. Petra drew a sharp breath. When she spoke, her voice carried the icy precision of someone who'd spent 20 years in courtrooms. You recorded us, she said, not a question. A catalog entry in your own home without consent. That's illegal wiretapping in Pennsylvania two-party consent state, inadmissible in any proceeding. I recorded conversations in my kitchen, I replied. Whether a court would admit it is a question for another day. But we're not in court today, Petra. We're in my living room. And what you just heard is your own voice. Her jaw tightened. She was already 3 moves ahead, reconstructing her position, even as the audio still echoed in the room. Fine, she said, but none of this changes the fundamental legal reality. Pennsylvania probate law guarantees inheritance rights to the sole heir. General Laws, Chapter 191, Section 15. You can't disinherit your only child, even if you transfer assets before death, if the court determines you did so. Specifically to defeat inheritance claims, they can void the transfers under fraudulent conveyance doctrine. She'd researched this thoroughly, knew exactly which statutes applied, had prepared for this confrontation enough to commit case law to memory. Her groundwork ran deeper than I'd anticipated. I allowed myself a cold smile. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Under normal circumstances, Brett would inherit everything. The house, the duplex, my retirement accounts, all of it." Relief flickered across her face. She thought she'd found the crack in my foundation. "But 4 days before you docked in Seattle," I continued, "I executed an irrevocable trust under Chapter 203E. Not a revocable living trust one I could modify or dissolve. An irrevocable trust with a named institutional beneficiary established while I was demonstrably competent with independent legal counsel, witnessed by a notary and 2 disinterested parties." I drew the certified deed from the folder, county seal embossed in blue. Recording date, December 2nd, 2023, 2 days before this meeting. While they were somewhere off the British Columbia coast photographing glaciers, I was sitting in Gwendolyn's office signing the duplex away permanently. The property transferred to the trust the moment I signed, I said. Not when I die, the moment I signed. It's no longer mine to give or withhold. It belongs to the Elise Hargrove Memorial Scholarship Fund, incorporated as a 501c3 charitable foundation. The house follows the same structure already titled to the trust beneficiary designated protections encoded in the instrument itself. I slid the deed across the mahogany table. Petra snatched at scanning the legal language with prosecutor speed. I watched her face as the reality settled in. "This is a structural wall," I said quietly. "Not to punish Brett, to protect your mother's legacy from your choices." Watching that certified deed slide across the mahogany was like watching the last lifeboat pull away from the dock. No rescue on the horizon, just cold water ahead. Petra set the deed down with surgical precision. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. 20 years of courtroom discipline held firm. 1 full minute of silence. I counted that too. 60 seconds where nobody moved, nobody spoke. Nobody drew a breath loud enough to disturb the wreckage spread across the coffee table. Then Petra stood. "We'll sue," she said. The icy precision had drained from her voice, replaced by something with a harder edge. "Undue influence. Gwendolyn Ashford manipulated a grieving widower who just buried his wife. Exploited your vulnerability to divert assets away from your own family. We'll depose her, audit her billing records, subpoena every communication between you. By the time we're finished, that trust will be voided and she'll be disbarred." I leaned back in my chair and kept my voice steady. "I have a video competency deposition," I said. "Recorded 3 weeks ago with an independent geriatric psychiatrist and a court-certified notary. 28 minutes of me walking through the trust structure, naming beneficiaries, citing asset values, demonstrating clear understanding of every consequence. Your legal fees will outrun any settlement you might win, and Gwendolyn's malpractice insurance covers frivolous claims. They have better lawyers than you can afford." Petra's knuckles went white on her purse strap. When she turned to Brett for support, I watched him shrink not away from me, but away from her. That landed harder than I expected. "They stand up," she hissed at Brett. "Say something. He stripped away your inheritance. He recorded us like we were criminals. He's turning your mother's memory into a weapon against us. Stand up and push back." Brett looked at his wife, then at me, then at his hands folded quietly in his lap. Then he said 2 words. Quiet, final. "Enough, Petra." She froze, staring at him, as though he'd addressed her in a foreign language. "What?" "Enough," he said again. "He's right. His voice broke. "We were going to put him in memory care, take everything he had. Dalton had it all mapped out, and I went along with it because you told me it was the only way to clear our debt, and I was too afraid to say no." He stopped. His eyes moved to the audio file still showing on my laptop screen. "He'll never see it coming," he whispered, quoting his own recorded words. "That's what I said. About my own father." Petra's sneer could have stripped paint. "You're pathetic," she said, snatched up her portfolio, and didn't spare a glance for either of us, just turned on her heel and moved toward the door. "This isn't over," she called without looking back. "You'll be hearing from our attorney." "You mean your attorney?" Brett said, still quiet, still in his chair. She stopped, hand on the doorknob, for 3 full seconds. I thought she might turn around, might say the one thing that would pull him back into her orbit. She didn't. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Petra was gone. Brett sat motionless, staring at the trust deed like a man reading his own obituary. Then there were 2 of us, father and son, no attorneys, no money, just wreckage. The wreckage lay between us on the coffee table. Evidence documents, the laptop with its damning audio still loaded. I'm not certain how long we sat there, long enough for the afternoon light to turn amber, long enough for the question to finally climb up from wherever he'd been holding it. "Will you ever forgive me?" Brett's voice came out barely above a murmur. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the trust deed, on the scholarship fund charter, on the undeniable proof that his inheritance had been redirected into something larger than his mistakes. I let the question hang there, turned it over, the way I'd examine a blueprint: structural integrity, load-bearing elements, points of potential failure. "I already have," I said. His head came up fast. Hope flared in his eyes, raw and desperate. "But forgiveness and trust are different engineering problems," I continued. "I can forgive weakness. I can forgive fear. I can even forgive the fact that you chose your wife's plan over your father's dignity." The hope dimmed. "What I cannot do is rebuild a collapsed bridge, not at 60, not when the foundation turned out to be sand instead of bedrock. And I don't have years left to pour concrete and wait for it to cure just to learn whether the structure will hold." Brett's hands had started trembling again, the same tremor I'd seen when the recording played, when his own voice filled the room with such casual cruelty. "What are we now?" he asked. I looked at my son, 35 years old, civil engineer, husband to a woman who just walked out on him, father to no one, heir to nothing. "We're father and son," I said. "That's a biological fact. It doesn't shift based on trust or forgiveness or inheritance. But everything else, the friendship, the partnership, the assumption that I'll be there to catch you when you fall, that requires foundation work you haven't started yet." "Tell me how," he said. "Tell me what to do and I'll—" "No." The word landed hard, final. "You need to stand on your own feet," I said. "Not as punishment, because it's the only way you actually survive your life. Petra built your world for you, told you what to think, where to work, how to spend, who to betray. You handed her the controls and called it a marriage. Now you have to take them back." Brett closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "And then you'll find out," I said, "one way or the other." He rose slowly like a man testing his legs after a long illness and gathered the evidence documents, his copies, the ones bearing his signature, the proof of what he'd been part of. I didn't stop him. He needed to carry it. At the door he turned back. "I love you, Dad." "I know," I said. "I love you too. That was never the question." He nodded, pulled the door open, and stepped out into the December cold, without his jacket shoulders curved inward, carrying papers that weighed far more than their physical mass. Watching him walk to his car felt like watching a building settle after foundation repair, slower than collapse, less certain than solid ground. His taillights rounded the corner and disappeared. The house went quiet. I sat in the amber light for another hour alone with Elise's photograph and the trust documents that bore her name. 3 days later, on a gray Saturday morning, I found a plain white envelope wedged into the front gate mailbox. No return address, no postage hand-delivered. Inside, a certified check, made out to me for exactly $4,750, dated December 6th, 2023, drawn on a credit union I didn't recognize. And a piece of notebook paper, torn carefully along the spiral edge, 9 words in Brett's handwriting. "This is your money. I'm sorry. Brett." Not, "We're sorry." Not Petra and I. Just Brett. I turned the check over. Standard certified funds, no conditions attached. I held it up to the window, checked the watermark, confirmed it was genuine. This wasn't hush money. This wasn't an opening bid in some negotiation. This was $4,750, the exact cost of the Alaska cruise package he and Petra had charged to my card, while I ate turkey sandwiches alone in November, which meant Brett had liquidated something sold, an asset cashed out an account, maybe pawned the Tag Heuer watch Petra had given him for their 5th anniversary. This wasn't spare cash. It was deliberate sacrifice. Petra's name was conspicuously absent from the note. The first independent move he'd made in years, and it arrived without her signature anywhere on it. That told me more than any apology letter could have. The check wasn't enough to repair what had broken, but it was enough to show he understood what had broken in the first place. I stood at my kitchen table for 5 minutes, the check in one hand and the note in the other, weighing it. Then I took out a fresh envelope, wrote Brett's address on the front, slipped the certified check inside, the same check uncashed, unredeemed, and added a note card. Use this to clear hard money debt. Stand tall, Dad. Not love Dad. Not all is forgiven. Just the structural truth. He needed a foundation more than I needed reimbursement. I walked 3 blocks to the blue postal collection box at the intersection of Chestnut and Broad, stood there in the December cold with the envelope in hand, reading Brett's address one more time. He'd made the first move, claimed responsibility, acted outside Petra's influence for the first time in a decade. Maybe that was enough to build on. Maybe not. Time would tell. I dropped the envelope through the slot. The metallic echo felt like pressing a seed into frozen ground. No guarantee of spring, just the stubborn belief that structure outlasts sentiment. No grand speeches, just a father showing his son how to lay his own foundation, however late in the season. I walked back with empty hands and a strange lightness in my chest. Whether the seed would take or freeze was still an open question. The sound of heavy luggage wheels on asphalt drew me to the kitchen window the next morning. 6 suitcases, 2 carry-ons, 1 airport taxi idling in the driveway. Dalton and Miriam Fenley were leaving. Dalton, 62, moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had packed and fled before. His silver hair was perfectly groomed despite the early hour. His polo shirt was pressed, his leather shoes polished to a shine, even as he hoisted bags into the taxi's trunk. This was Petra's father, the convicted real estate fraudster out of Broward County, the man who'd architected the institutionalization scheme, the voice on my audio recording, casually walking me through how memory care facilities handle everything. Miriam, 58, slender and perfectly put together, in a cream cardigan and pearls, supervised from the passenger side. She had Petra's sharp cheekbones and that same tight-lipped expression I'd watched come over her daughter whenever a legal argument fell apart. She passed Dalton, a carry-on, checked her watch, said something I couldn't make out through the glass. They moved fast, but deliberate, not frantic. These were people who knew how to execute a strategic retreat. Neither one glanced toward my side of the duplex as they loaded bag after bag. The avoidance was studied, purposeful. They knew I was watching. They simply couldn't afford to acknowledge it. Then Dalton paused, hand on the taxi door handle, 1 foot already inside. He stopped and looked straight up at the kitchen window, where I stood holding my coffee. Our eyes connected through the glass. Maybe 3 seconds, long enough to read the calculation behind his expression. Not defiance, not anger, recognition. The acknowledgement of a seasoned con artist who understood he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd badly underestimated. He'd pegged me as an easy mark, a grieving widower, a lonely engineer hungry for family connection. He'd built an entire financial strategy on that assumption, and I'd taken it apart with the same structural precision he'd once used to defraud investors in Florida 15 years ago. I held his gaze, didn't raise the coffee cup, didn't nod, just stood there, still and steady. Dalton looked away, first slid into the taxi, pulled the door shut. The taxi backed out of the driveway at 6:47 a.m. I watched until the taillights vanished around the corner onto Maple Street. Some people leave quietly when the structure proves stronger than their leverage. An hour later, my phone chimed with an email from Gwendolyn. Raymond's entity withdrew all property filings this morning. Clean paperwork, no explanation, no counterclaims. Florida disclosure appears to have neutralized their litigation appetite. Fenleys are officially out of play. Well done, G.A. I read it twice, set the phone down, poured a second cup of coffee. Watching that taxi pull away had felt like watching storm clouds peel back from the horizon. Nothing dramatic, just the slow return of clear sky. The Fenleys were gone. The legal threats had dissolved. The external pressure had lifted. What remained was harder to put a number on. Over the next 2 weeks, the operational decoupling ran with mechanical efficiency. December 8th, Brett's independent internet installation. The technician's van sat in the driveway for 90 minutes while they ran new cable to Unit B. I heard the drilling through the shared wall, careful, professional. December 10th, utility transfers, electric, gas, water, all moved into Brett's name. The city sent confirmation notices. No more shared bills. No more tangled accounts. No more ambiguity about who was paying for what. December 14th. Bank notification on my phone. Deposit received, $2,400 rent payment unit B. I stared at that notification for a full minute. $2,400 market rate first of the month. The first punctual rent payment in 5 years of Brett living in that unit. Not early, not carrying an apology note, not hedged with excuses about cash flow or contractor delays. Just on-time professional correct. The $2,400 deposit wasn't triumph. It was the sound of structure functioning exactly as designed, unremarkable, sustainable adult. I saved the notification, filed it, and the trust account records moved on. Petra's presence in Unit B became a kind of ghost story. I knew she was there. Her car stayed in the driveway, white Volvo gleaming in the December cold. But I never saw her, never heard her voice through the walls, never crossed paths in the shared hallway, the driveway, or around the mailboxes. The avoidance was deliberate, the kind that takes real effort and planning. She was physically present but had disengaged entirely. Her silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. I found myself wondering whether she was working out her own exit strategy, weighing her options, deciding whether the marriage to Brett was worth salvaging, now that the inheritance she'd counted on had dissolved into a scholarship fund she couldn't touch. The marriage was fracturing. I could feel it through the walls. Not arguments, but the absence of sound. No conversation, no laughter, none of the ordinary noise of two people sharing a life. Just silence and separate schedules. Brett, by contrast, had become visible. December 18th, late afternoon. I was carrying groceries in from the car when I ran into him in the shared hallway between the units. He had his work bag over one shoulder, tie loosened, looking worn but upright. We both stopped. 2 seconds. Neither of us moved. Then Brett nodded. Not a bow, not an apology, just a simple, even acknowledgement. I returned it. Same weight, same meaning. No words, no forced reconciliation. No pretending the wreckage didn't exist. This is what adult boundaries actually look like. Not hostility, not warmth, just functional respect. He continued toward his unit. I continued toward mine. The doors closed separately. Petra's car remained in the driveway, but her curtains stayed drawn. Brett's utility bills arrived in his name. Whether their marriage would survive was no longer an engineering problem I was cleared to solve. I had my own engineering to attend to problems I could actually work on, foundations I could genuinely build. Gwendolyn's voice came through the phone, carrying the official validation I'd been waiting 3 weeks to hear. The IRS logged the 501c3 filing this morning, she said. I could hear the smile behind her words, that quiet satisfaction lawyers get when paperwork lands exactly where it's supposed to. Entered the standard review pipeline. Tax-exempt status is projected for mid-2024, barring any unusual scrutiny. I stood at the kitchen island, afternoon sun, streaming through the window, turning the granite countertop into a field of light. December 21st, the shortest day of the year. Fitting that Elise's legacy would be formalized in the very season we'd lost her. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Nothing immediately," Gwendolyn said. "The foundation is legally operational now, even before IRS approval. You can accept donations, establish bylaws, begin administrative work. Actual disbursements should probably wait. Wire $50,000 to the trust escrow account," I said. "Today if possible, first-year scholarships." Silence on the line, 2 seconds, then 3. "Before tax-exempt approval?" she asked carefully. "That's legal, but it's not efficient. You'll pay regular income tax on any earnings until the exemption clears. Could cost you several thousand." "I understand. Rowan, this was never about efficiency. Students need support now." I said, "Not in 6 months when the paperwork catches up. Wire the $50,000. Set up the first round of applications for spring semester." Another pause. Then Gwendolyn's voice came back warmer, softer. "I'll have the transfer completed by end of business today," she said. "Do you want me to draft a press release? Local paper might pick it up. Retired civil engineer, honors late wife's memory, with scholarship fund, good human interest story." I looked out the window at the deck where frost was forming in the corners at the bare oak tree Elise had planted when we first moved in at the quiet neighborhood that had watched my family come apart and reassemble into something I barely recognized. "No," I said. "Just make sure the check's clear for the kids." Understood, Gwendolyn said. I'll send confirmation when the wire processes. I hung up and set the phone on the counter. Elise would have wanted the scholarships going to students like she had once been second chances for people who understood structure because they'd lived without it. She'd worked 3 jobs to pay for night classes at UMass. Philadelphia graduated with honors at 28, then became a teacher who spent her own money on supplies for kids whose parents couldn't afford notebooks. She never framed it as sacrifice. She called it investment. The scholarship fund wasn't a memorial, it was continuation. The wire confirmation came through at 4:47 p.m. $50,000 transferred from my savings to the Elise Hargrove Memorial Scholarship Fund escrow account. Cleared, official, real. I saved the email and closed the laptop. That night, long after the December dark had settled over the house, I sat back down at the kitchen table with the laptop open again. The screen glowed in the stillness, throwing shadows along the walls. I pulled up a website I'd been steering away from for weeks. Cape May Point, New Jersey. Ocean view rooms, lighthouse walking distance off-season rates. Elise and I had planned to go there for our 40th anniversary. She'd bookmarked the inn on our shared computer circle dates on the calendar in purple ink. Talked about finally taking that coastal trip we'd been putting off since Brett was born. We never made it. 40 years became 39 years and 7 months. And the purple ink on the calendar became a memorial service timeline. I clicked through to the booking page. 5 nights single occupancy ocean view room, January 15th to 20th, 2024. The cursor blinked on the payment screen like a heartbeat, proof that agency once reclaimed doesn't ask permission to exist. I entered my credit card number, my name, my email, my phone. No checking with Brett about whether January fit his schedule. No group text to coordinate logistics. No Petra reviewing the itinerary for budget optimization. Just me making a call about my own life, booking a trip I'd take alone. I clicked confirm reservation. The confirmation page came up. Booking number, check-in instructions, cancellation policy. I read it twice to be certain it was real. Then I pulled an index card from the drawer and wrote in careful block letters. Plumber Hayes and Sons, 617-555-0247. Electrician Brennan, 617-555-0183. HVAC Cordero, 617-555-0291. Back December 30th. Not a reconciliation letter, not an apology, an invitation, or an olive branch. Just practical information. The same contractors I'd relied on for 20 years. The same numbers I'd dialed when pipes froze or breakers tripped or the furnace started making sounds it had no business making. Brett lived here now, paid rent, maintained his own utilities. He needed to know who to call if something in the structure failed while I was away. This was responsible detachment, bounded stewardship, the final act of a landlord making sure his tenant had what he needed to keep the property running. Nothing more. I walked to the shared hallway in my socks, quiet on the hardwood. No light showed under Brett's door. 11:38 p.m. He was either asleep or doing a convincing impression of it. I slid the index card under the door, heard it scrape across the floorboards on the other side, didn't knock, didn't linger for any acknowledgement, just turned and went back to my side of the duplex. In the kitchen, I opened the laptop one last time. The confirmation email sat in my inbox alongside Gwendolyn's wire transfer receipt. Cape May Point, 5 nights single occupancy ocean view. Elise Hargrove Memorial Scholarship Fund, $50,000 cleared. I looked over the reservation and closed the laptop. This time, nobody had booked the ticket on my behalf. Nobody held the authority to cancel. January 15th arrived cold and clear. The date I'd circled in purple ink sat there uncanceled. The same suitcase waited by the door, the one I'd packed on November 14th. But this time, no one could pull the trip out from under me. I carried it to the trunk at 6:30 a.m., breath clouding in the December air. The gravel crunched under my boots. The car was cold, but started on the first turn engine, settling into a steady idle. Brett's front door swung open as I closed the trunk. We both stopped, stood there across the shared driveway, 2 men holding coffee cups and car keys, living parallel lives inside the same physical space. He looked better, not healed, but upright, clean-shaven work bag over his shoulder. The hollowness in his eyes had begun filling with something harder to name. Accountability, maybe, or simply exhaustion. "Where are you heading?" he asked. Not demanding, not prying, just the way neighbors ask. New Jersey, I said. Few days on the coast. He nodded, shifted his coffee cup to his other hand. Drive carefully, he said. Highway gets slick near the state line this time of year. The concern wasn't a play, wasn't strategy, just genuine, slightly awkward care from a man learning how to relate without leverage. I will, I said. We both got into our vehicles. He reversed out first, headed east toward the engineering firm. I pulled out second, headed north. At the intersection of Chestnut and Broad, our paths split. His taillights swung, right mine turned left. No wave, no horn, just separation. Interstate 95 north stretched ahead of me like a promise finally kept. 4 hours of solitary driving through Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, into New Jersey. Waylon Jennings on the radio, Luckenbach, Texas, and then Willie Nelson with On the Road Again. Nobody in the passenger seat with opinions about my music. No one demanding we pull over every 90 minutes. Nobody clocking my speed or offering commentary on my lane changes. Just me and the open road and the music. I crossed into New Hampshire at 8:47 a.m., crossed into New Jersey at 10:23 a.m. The landscape changed, more pine, fewer strip malls, the kind of open space that used to make Elise roll down her window and breathe in slow. You spend 30 years building infrastructure, you learn something. The strongest foundations are the ones that no longer need you standing watch over them. I'd built state bridges from 1983 to 2013. 30 years of load calculations, concrete, pours stress tests, safety inspections. Hundreds of thousands of people cross my work every single day without knowing my name, without glancing down at the structure holding them up. That's exactly how it should be. Good engineering dissolves into reliability. I'd married Elise in 1985, raised a son through Little League and algebra homework and college applications. Lost her in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and failure. Watched my son board a cruise ship without me at Terminal B. Stood back up when standing seemed structurally impossible. Not a victim's history. A blueprint of a man who lost his footing but refused to let the foundation crack. The radio DJ broke in. That was Willie Nelson with On the Road Again, coming up more outlaw country to carry you through the morning. I turned the volume up. Cape May Point appeared at 1:14 p.m. Weathered lighthouse granite cliffs, ocean stretching out to the curve of the earth. The inn sat back from the overlook white clapboard with blue shutters exactly as it looked in the photos Elise had bookmarked. I checked in with a woman named Agnes 70s, something who handed me a brass key and pointed toward the coastal path. Best views from the granite outcrop. 10-minute walk. Watch your footing rocks get slippery. My room was small, clean, perfect ocean view window, Adirondack chair on a private deck. Quilted bedspread that held the smell of cedar and salt air. I set my suitcase down and stepped outside. The Atlantic spread out without end. Gray-blue water meeting gray-white sky, the line between them sharp as a blueprint. The wind carried that cold salt smell I'd been chasing since November. The scent of something larger than family betrayal and legal strategy and trust documents. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from Brett. Are you really writing me off completely? I settled into the Adirondack chair, stared at the screen, watched the waves break against rocks that had been standing here longer than my entire family tree. I typed, no. I simply returned you to the exact foundation you chose for yourself. I sent it, watched the delivered confirmation appear. Then I powered the phone off completely. Not airplane mode, not silent. Off. The granite outcrop below had been here 10,000 years, weathering every storm without ever needing to prove a thing. I could learn from that. The ocean drove against the rocks, rhythmic, timeless, indifferent to the bridges men build or walk away from. That sound filled everything, crowding out the audio recording, and the trust documents, and the confrontation, and the scholarship fund, and the $2,400 rent deposits. Just waves, just wind, just the Atlantic doing what it had done long before humans invented inheritance or betrayal or irrevocable trusts. I closed my eyes and heard Elise's voice, not imagined, not manufactured. The real memory from the hospital 3 days before she died, when morphine made her honest and clarity made her wise. Never turn yourself into a bridge people walk across until they forget to look down. She'd been talking about Brett, about the way I'd spent 35 years being the foundation he took for granted, about the difference between structural support and structural sacrifice. I opened my eyes. The ocean was still there, The granite was still there. I was still there. I've built more than enough bridges, Elise. Time to stand on the shore for a while. If you've stayed with me this long, then you already understand why this story had to be told. I spent 30 years building bridges strong enough to hold weight I never asked anyone to acknowledge. Then I spent 2 more years watching people I loved treat that strength like a resource they were entitled to drain. What this cost me isn't something I can put a clean number on, but I believe God doesn't let a man lose everything without also showing him what was worth keeping. That's the quiet truth buried inside all of this. Not the legal strategy, not the trust documents, not the scholarship fund, but the moment I finally stopped being a bridge and started being a man standing on solid ground. Here's what I'd want you to carry with you from this story. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them even when loving them makes it painful to do so. Document everything before you confront anything. Emotion without evidence is a door they'll walk right through. If you give someone a foundation and they treat it like a ladder, the most loving thing you can do is stop holding it steady for them. And an inheritance isn't something you leave behind. It's something you build into the world while you're still standing in it. These are the kinds of father stories that don't get told. Often enough, the quiet ones, the slow burns, the dad's revenge that never raised its voice and never had to. If this one found its way to you, please pass it along to someone who might need to hear it today. Leave me a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't already, I'd be grateful to have you subscribe to His Hidden Revenge. There are more stories here worth your time. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.